Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 196th edition of the Frank and Stan chat. And it's a brand new academic year. This is the first week in September with the schools back. And for those of you watching on video, you will notice that we have a guest. John Malynn has joined us today. Hello, John.
Good morning.
Yeah, hello. We'll do the little introductions in a short while, but let's get to Stan. It's been a few weeks since we've met, Stan.
Yeah,
We've had the summer break. How are things at your end?
few holidays, a bit of
Yeah,
a tan. Yeah, it's good. It's a beautiful day today as well. So
yeah.
I think maybe we're going to get a late summer, are we?
Well, that always happens, doesn't it? You have a rubbish August, then first week in September the sun comes out. I mean, the yeah. So, John, we have known each other for quite some time.
We
Do
have
you want to
indeed.
just give a little summary of your career and how we've met?
Okay, thank you, Frank. Yes, I'm a career civil servant. We met through my role as a policy lead on school accountability, and in particular on school inspection in my time in the DfE. I spent many years in charge of policy and legislation around Ofsted as a body and school inspection in particular, and did that role supporting ministers until 2014 when, surprise, surprise, I actually went across and joined Ofsted for
Yeah.
the latter part of my career, having been persuaded by Sir Michael Wilshaw at the time to come and support them on inspection policy. So from 2014 to 2018, I worked in Ofsted as principal officer for school inspection policy. So
Yeah, I'm
my,
interested. What was the difference in culture between the two organisations? You know, was there one, or was it? It's still a civil service servant role, but
yeah, I mean, the sort of principles behind it are pretty much the same. I think probably had slightly more influence in Ofsted, interestingly, partly because I knew Sir Michael, and one of the things that I wanted to ensure was that I had an opportunity to be at the big discussions around things that were happening, and he was true to his word, and I did get that opportunity. Sometimes in the department, there's obviously lots more players and different layers, and it's a mixture of officials and advisors and ministers.
yeah,
So the opportunity to get messages through is sometimes far more constrained because there's more opportunities for people to change messages as they go up the line, so to speak.
yeah. We used to meet quite regularly in the years because my career in Ofsted sort of fluctuated between sort of framework development and then going back to a region and doing some work, then coming back to do framework. So, but I do remember meeting you very frequently. Often having a coffee in the basement of the DfE building. And I have to say, I mean, when people ask me who was the guest today, number of ex HMI, I mean, I will share them with you. I'm happy to share because the comments are very, very positive, and I think that you were always trying to find a way forward. Trying to sort of maneuver people into a position where if there was a conflict between what the DfE wanted or what Ofsted, or even within Ofsted, there was a conflict or pressure. You were always trying to find a happy sort of central ground where people felt as though they'd got some of it, but perhaps not all of it, but enough of it to feel as though they could accept it. So I think that the feedback on and the relationship I had with you was very, I found very supportive. We never fell out.
No, we didn't.
uh, But I think, we've had an interesting week this week, haven't we? I mean, this wasn't planned in this way. We had no idea that Ofsted was going to publish the big listen and the Dame Christine Gilbert report on the beginning of the week. It's just chance, fortuitous that you've joined us, and I'm conscious of, I'm mindful of the fact that I am a former Ofsted employee, and you're a former DfE and Ofsted employee. So there's a limit to, I think, what I want to say, without being disloyal to people that I work with. But I mean, I've got to ask you, what was your reaction when you saw those two reports, or that report with the annex of the Gilbert report at the back?
Um, I think sadly it wasn't surprising. I think um, there was some skepticism in the system, wasn't there, about a former chief inspector doing it. But knowing Christine Gilbert,
Yeah.
I knew she would do a thorough, objective assessment, and that's exactly what came out. But it's damning. I think Ofsted and government should be quite concerned about what that says about the reputation of the inspectorate, and regardless of the fact that yes, we need inspection, and yes, they've announced policy changes. There's some big steps ahead to restore confidence and to put in place inspection that people can have trust in.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the thing that I started to get concerned about it wasn't actually leaving. I didn't leave Ofsted in September 2012 under a cloud. I wasn't aware of it. I mean, I'd always got on well with Michael Wilshaw and other colleagues. I just felt completely zonked. I'd just given everything I'd had. I mean, I felt physically and emotionally drained by two frameworks in 9 months. It basically saw me off. But I do remember when I went to become a CEO of a multi academy trust and seeing two inspections taking place close after each other, and seeing a feeling as though the quality of inspectors was diminishing. That there was a lot of very, very inexperienced people doing these inspections. Possibly have been, and many of them probably senior people in their trust or in their school, but not deeply rooted in inspection. And I saw the impact of a single inspector leaning on quite heavily on the inspection team. So we were losing that sort of corporate nature of the judgment making that was going. That reminded me then of an event I saw, and I can say this, I think in about 2010, 2011, where one of the Ofsted directors was in conversation with the minister, and the minister wanted to have a separate special educational needs framework. Now, you and I are old enough to know, and Stan knows this, there used to be one of those. But basically, they moved away from that on the basis that most children with special educational needs are taught in mainstream school. So it would, in effect, be a special school framework, which really, in a way, is an odd way to look at it. I think is the way that they were looking. But that minister was leaning really heavily on the director, driving that forward. And it reminded me of a conversation I had with, I can mention his name, Mike Claddingbowl, in the lift at Ofsted, where I said to Mike, what would you go for, Mike? An Education Act or a new Ofsted framework? Which one of those do you think is probably going to penetrate in the schools more? And both of us agreed it would be the Ofsted framework, because you can actually influence practice that way, and you're not opening it up to scrutiny in the way that you would with an Education Act. You wouldn't have to trawl that through Parliament, get into the Lords, and all of that debate is just basically pushed through at that time. So I think that for me that was a point in time around the 2012, 2014 time when I felt that it didn't quite feel right, and people were starting to speak to me about concerns about what was happening within the organisation. So I don't know how helpful that is, but I mean, can you sort of lay out a sort of line as to how things have changed in your time between, the DfE and policy driving and Ofsted's response to that?
I think it, going back to sort of my early days in school, I mean, I joined when it was 2004, I think, when we were working on the 2005 legislation,
Yeah.
and was involved in almost every piece of legislation affecting Ofsted from then up until 2014. I think in the early days, I think it felt like there was a better understanding of the importance of the relationship. So there were meetings at lots of different levels. I mean, ministers clearly always met with the chief inspector. That was a regular feature anyway. But even at sort of director general level, there were regular meetings. and opportunities for officials to inform the agenda for those meetings. So lots of business was regularly reviewed and discussed and debated, and things ironed out along the way. It feels to me that some of that's been lost over time, and some of that was, as you described, those meetings that we had. Things like that were happening on a regular basis at a number of different levels. And for the wheels of government to work and for non-departmental bodies to function, those things are important because there will be tensions and things that need fixing and ironing out along the way. And that's where we came in. We did a lot of that. And when it doesn't happen, things start to deteriorate, relationships deteriorate, people get more defensive. And it just feels like some of that has fallen away in recent years. And I think, it's had a detrimental effect, I think, on, the delivery of inspection.
Yeah, it was good. I thought Christine Gilbert's report made clear the struggle that Ofsted's had with the budget.
Yeah.
And I think, at the end of the day, if you're not willing to fund this sort of activity properly, shortcuts have to be made in order to achieve a target, And I think that the loss of experienced inspectors, experienced HMI, as well as experienced civil servants who work within Ofsted as well. Some of those colleagues who I can think of one in particular who was able to stand their ground firmly as a civil servant with a ministerial chief inspector to make clear that the dangers or the risks involved in that. If you lose that sort of character, then and at times it's annoying. All of us have worked with colleagues, had to lead colleagues like that, but actually they're crucially important at those sorts of times. It's not as if you have to accept their advice, but actually that advice needs to be given. And I think the loss of some of that expertise and that experience also affected the ability of the organisation to move forward in a way that allowed it to connect with the DFE as well. So.
I think, Frank, in any organisation, if you're convinced that you're doing the right thing and what you're doing is the best that can be done, people can't advise you easily to say, no, you need to change, because there's a mindset that says we're already at the top of what we can do, and we're good at what we do. And that, for me, that's been part of the issue, that there hasn't actually been, well, two things. One, if you like, a credible opposition, some that can say, no, actually, we don't think you're operating at the level you should be. Or, my particular thing is about inconsistency of the quality of inspections. You're not getting that right, but instead it seems to be we've had blinkers on to say, yes, we are getting that right, and we're not listening. We're not listening. That seems to have been, and my experience, not at Ofsted level or DFE level, is on the ground. The difference between individual inspectors is making a massive difference to the inspection of particular schools. And it's about character, it's about approach, it's all the things that you want to be consistent, and they're not.
Well, I think Christine's report also, I've written a lot, I've written publicly about this. The quality of induction for HMIs is, compared to what I had, it's woeful. So and I'm glad that Christine, she acknowledged that, the sort of induction I had and the sort of experience we had, Stan, when we were seconded in as head teacher inspectors in the mid-90s, that can't be achieved now because of the cost, the cost of it. But at the end of the day, even though I'd worked with Stan for a year with Miriam Rosen as our mentor in the mid-90s, and she crawled over everything we did during that year. It was most amazing, wasn't it, Stan? This is the reason why we know each other, was experience. That was replicated when I joined as an HMI in 2001, even though I'd done loads of inspections, probably done a lot more inspections than the person who was mentoring me. But I still had that experience, and what was happening was that the wealth of the the history of HMI, the characters within it, and the journey of HMI, all of that was ploughed into me during that year. So it was about understanding the culture, understanding more the breadth of educational provision in the country. And I think for me, when I go to schools now, I'm bringing the fact that I went to one of the poshest independent schools in the country during that year, as well as going to the prison estate, as well as going to the secure unit estate. You know, all of that stuff is now playing into me when I think about things like exclusions. I'm thinking about that journey and what could happen, not saying it would, but all of that provision is there. So I think I brought all of that into inspection. And it was that that made me, I think, a bit more rounded in understanding, not being a better inspector, but understanding more the landscape of educational provision in the country. And I don't think currently HMI get anywhere near that. I think it's about framework, it's about delivering inspections. You know, so even though Ofsted isn't happy, I don't think they're happy with this. Christine's point about, well, they went for quantity over quality. I do sympathise with what Christine's saying. If we're not investing, you know, significantly in HMI and inspectors, we'll end up with a service that is inconsistent, Stan.
Mm.
I think sort of, the irony of all of this is, to some degree, government policy has contributed to this because, the growth of academies in the system, for all the good it's done, has taken a lot of good people away from, a career that might have included a spell as HMI. And, Ofsted can't financially compete with that. And people are going to where the money is, sadly.
Yeah.
And the ability to recruit good quality HMI is a major problem now.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I think, I'm not sure if we said it on this, or excuse me, another conversation I had that was quite often HMI was the ultimate end of your career. Not the end of your career. I mean, the thing you were heading to through a career. In teaching, it would be teaching some sort of leadership role, perhaps deputy, head teacher, advisor, HMI. There was a route there that people could see. And now HMI is only a step in CEO of an academy. And I think there is a point that you've not got as many, can't have as many very experienced HMIs because those are moving on now rather than staying with Ofsted. And that worries me because I think as a head, it was the experienced HMIs that visited the school who had the most influence on me, not somebody who was recently out of headship who I'd be thinking, well, you don't know more about it than I do. Whereas somebody with those years in HMI who've seen hundreds of schools, who've seen how things work in different contexts, can come in and say, well, actually, you might think you're doing this well, but I've seen a school in more dire situations than you make things better. And I felt that when I became an advisor, that all I had in my armoury was what I'd done as a head teacher. And it was a year or so before I'd seen enough schools as an advisor to start to develop a different mindset, a different approach to schools, saying, yeah, but this school A down the road is doing this and school B is doing that. And it was a wider experience and a wider knowledge base that I grew in that first year. And I always remember the senior advisor saying, when you leave headship into advisors, you've got a pocket of gold dust of stuff that you've done and you could sprinkle it on your colleagues. But if you're not careful, the gold dust runs out. And if you don't keep refilling it with further experiences, then there's nothing left for you after a year or two. And I think, as an analogy, I thought that worked really well with me because I then started to think, well, what am I getting extra from the work I'm doing that I can pass on to other schools?
Yeah, I mean, I'm conscious of the time because we've spent 20 minutes already talking about this. But I think when we get to what's caught our eye, we'll revisit some of these issues, I think, perhaps from a different angle. Stan, do you want to go first? What's caught your eye this week?
Well, I read in the manifesto, the Labour's manifesto, and I've seen it emphasised again today that they're going to introduce regional teams of school improvement, and the announcement is that all schools, not just academies, will have access to these teams. And what I can't see is the how, without, as John said before, removing another layer of influential people out of schools in order to provide this organisation. It would have to be enormous. If all schools are going to have access to it, it would have to be bigger than Ofsted, because it takes more than the 2 days of an inspection to support a school through improvement. So where are these people going to come from? What's going to happen to the existing models in local authorities? I've got an interest in this. My company provides school improvement. What's the thinking behind that? Or is there no thinking yet until it starts to be put into place? Because I believe did you say, Frank, it's going to be at no cost?
Well, I heard something around that. Don't quote me on that, but I did hear that. But it's more around, I think, the desire for individual schools to be part of a sort of an ecosystem around them. So it's not, I think what they're trying to do is to get to a point where you don't just say, well, I'm all right, Jack. We've got a great school here. It's on the back of the fact that we have perhaps, taken kids away from the school that's struggling down the road. I think this is about trying to get a more rounded picture of the service and to have greater cooperation, collaboration between schools. I think that's the thinking behind it.
But whoever's thinking along that has never practically gone and spoken to schools about how to do that, because I've worked in several authorities now where the idea was that we'll cooperate, we'll all work together, and we'll work for the region or the district or the town. And as soon as you say, well, can you lend your year 6 teacher to the school down the road that's struggling? No, hang on, whoa. I'm not doing that. And and it's a common theme of mine, until you start making judgments on areas rather than on individual schools, you won't get it.
Yeah. Well, who knows what's going to come down the line? I mean, John and I have been down area reviews before. And actually, for me, with the local authority, the JARs and the APAs and all that sort of stuff, that was what they were sort of trying to achieve. And Ofsted became the lead inspectorate of a group of 9 inspectorates, and I was responsible for those joint area reviews and leading other inspectorates. So just getting the inspectorates around the table was a problem, let alone trying to make sense of all the priorities that they had within the area. But yeah, so John, what's caught your eye this week?
Well, I was going to mention a book that I've just read, which is the Rory Stewart Politics on the Edge, because it's a fascinating insight into where governments are today, and described very much almost like a presidential model of government, where number 10 rules, and what number 10 says goes, and the scope that ministers of state have seems to be much less than it used to be. And one of the particular things that struck me, and that was about announcements and how much emphasis he was saying there is on the announcement of new things, a new policy. It was all around the presentation, and it struck a chord with Monday, with the announcement by the Secretary of State for Education about removing the overall effectiveness grade. That suddenly came out on the first day of term, with no forewarning really that it was going to happen on that day. And it's been presented, it's a good thing because it's gone down as good news, because people are so fed up with Ofsted. Isn't it great? But yeah, that's all well and good, but what does it mean in practice? I've looked at Ofsted's website every single day this week. All that's on there is the DFE press release. There's been no update about what it means for inspection, when they're going to start. The framework is the April version, like the handbook is the April version. Everything is as per last year's arrangements. And taking away the grade sounds very simplistic, but you and I know
Yeah.
in terms of getting the information that inspectors need to do this properly and for schools to understand the basis on which they're going to be judged. There's so much more to it. We don't know when that's going to be updated. It just feels so unjoined up, and I was quite disappointed. I mean, everyone was saying, "Oh, isn't this? It's an early quick win." Government's delivered on one of its manifesto pledges. Well, it hasn't. It's made a statement, but whether it works or not, how well it works for schools that are going to be in this transition year, I think there's lots of questions to be answered there.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah, I
not.
must admit, John, my first thought when I saw that on Monday was, shouldn't that have been an Ofsted announcement rather than a ministerial one? Because I still try and believe that Ofsted is somehow separate from the DfE and government, and HMI work without fear and favour, and therefore should be some level of independence. And I thought that should have been Sir Martin Oliver saying, this is what we're going to do as a result of the various big lists and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it from the other perspective, having worked in government, that it's the manifesto commitment, therefore it's it's a policy announcement. But it would have been far more helpful, I think, to have alongside the ministerial announcement, or even on the same platform, Ofsted's contribution to what it's going to mean, and a signal that they actually support it. It almost came across as Ofsted's blindsided here. They weren't actually in the loop, and that doesn't paint a very good picture, I think, for the system.
No, there's a lot of wheels turning in August, isn't there, on this?
Yes.
Not wanting offer some sympathy, some reality that you have got people who, let's face it, if you're an Ofsted senior director, it's been a tough year.
Yeah.
And no doubt you have booked your 2-week holiday, some of them, at a time when in fact, all of this is happening. And and these are sorts of decisions where you need to get your whole team together, to agree the way forward. It feels as though there were bits of the puzzle missing as they were trying to progress this, and also trying to pull together that big listen report. And also, I don't think Dame Christine Gilbert's report, it said that the evidence gathering went into August. Right. So that suggests that came quite late in the day as well. So in a way, it's in a sense a little bit understandable that perhaps pieces weren't joined up. But it's funny. I thought if this is such a significant event, surely Parliament should have heard about it first. But I mean, perhaps I'm just overstating it. But yeah, I mean, you might be able to answer this. I mean, in statute, is the overall effectiveness grade in any law? So in effect, does it state, is there an act of Parliament that says there needs to be, or there will be, an overall effectiveness judgment on school inspections? And actually pulling that out now actually means that there's a breach in terms of the legislation. Like, for example, SMSC.
No, I don't think there is.
Right.
The law doesn't go into that degree of detail. It's the framework and the handbooks that describe it. The one bit of the law, which is the interesting bit, is around schools causing concern, because there is a statutory definition of a school causing concern, which is linked to the inadequate judgment. So that raises a number of questions. If you don't have an overall effectiveness grade, how does that bit of the law apply in the context where Ofsted and or the department decide that they consider a school to be causing concern? Because it would have been based on the overall effectiveness grade.
Right. I can ask another question, which do you mind? Sorry about this, folks, but I've been trying to think about the definition of special measures, which I think is actually quite a useful phrase. So special measures is required in order to provide what was then a satisfactory education. I don't know if that's still the strapline or whether it's been changed or shifted to provide a good education. But it was when I first got involved in inspection, that's what special measures was. That was the definition of it. So I suppose two questions is, the first is, when did that become inadequate? Was special measures always deemed inadequate? Or was it actually just special measures? Because in effect, when you think about the wording, special measures, yeah, a school that's struggling needs special measures. It doesn't necessarily mean it's inadequate. If somebody's labelled it inadequate, but actually we're looking at school improvement teams here, then there will be a range of schools going through particular difficulties that require some special measures to help them improve. Now, describing it in that way is not, to me, inadequate. But somewhere along the line, that special measures phrase has become adopted as inadequate. When did that happen?
When it felt that the school wasn't capable of improving itself and therefore required special measures.
That's right. Yes, if you look at the piece of the law around schools causing concern, it breaks down causing concern into two components. Yes. The first is a school that requires significant improvement, and the second is a school that requires significant improvement and doesn't have the capacity to improve on its own.
Yes.
And that's where the terms, the special measures came out of, subdividing inadequate into, schools that maybe could be turned around without external intervention, and those that require.
Yeah, because my understanding was that, going back to those early inspections, was that I don't remember us talking about inadequate schools. That phrase, inadequate schools, it was schools that required special measures. So it's just trying to work out, because I think the term special measures, I think, is quite helpful if it's not linked to inadequate.
I think you have to use the phrase, though. What used to annoy me with schools that people describe them as, it's in special measures, not it's receiving special support. If you use the full sentence that the school requires special measures in order to improve, then it sits comfortably. If you're just a school in special measures as a noun, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Well, that's my rabbit hole, isn't it? This is where I've been talking about. Stan's going to have a buzzer every time we talk about Ofsted in the future, but I've got to get out of my rabbit hole. I genuinely feel as though I've got myself too closely wound up in all of this, and for my own sort of mental health, I need to sort of find myself somewhere else to go. But the problem will be this coming year. There is the agenda for Ofsted seems completely unachievable. The focus after Caversham on this new framework is going to be immense. That's going to require a lot of consultation. This is not something you can just push through. We're going to end up with a safeguarding framework or process that's going to contribute to this. We're going to end up, it looks as though there are going to be different headings for areas for investigation, areas of inquiry. There's going to have to be then the trialling of this, the training of inspectors, the communication with schools, and all of that during the development of a scorecard. And how this affects the infrastructure of the accountability framework. And also, if you were to throw in, which I hope they would, contextual value added measures again in the scorecard. Whoa.
Definitely said context is going to be part of.
But the thing is, this is all going to be done, folks, and by September. And if we say this is the launch in September, this needs to be ready probably by Easter. Yeah, Easter.
I mean, you need to be publishing stuff in June so that people have enough of a lead-in time to understand what exactly it is and what how it will be implemented. As you say, you've got massive change to school inspection, with a report card system. it sounded like Ofsted's going to change the overall effectiveness grade for other remits as well. So that's all changing at the same time. They're setting up this new academy as part of this cultural shift and change in the way they do things. They've got the Gilbert Review to contend with. They've set up all these expert groups that were announced this week. I think there are about half a dozen of them. Which have got some really good people on them. Interestingly, I was quite pleased with some of the names that I've seen on those groups. To do all that and deliver inspection frameworks and handbooks in time for the next academic year, I just can't see how it can be done.
Well, it could be done, but it could be done badly, couldn't it? That's the risk.
Or they'll commit to it being done and then it'll get delayed until January. That's happened once before.
Yes, it has.
or somebody with a bit of foresight says, right, well, hang on, we'll reduce the number of inspections that we do this year so we can put more emphasis on the development side of things. We'll only inspect schools that are at risk or deemed to be heading towards risk, and so there'll be far fewer inspections this year, and the teams can concentrate on what they want to do and not promise it by September, but say when it's finished and developed we will trial it in the next school year. That would seem to me to give it the gravitas it needs to say this is a massive change, not this is something we can do while we're still doing our day job. And I felt sorry for Martin Oliver actually when I saw the video of him, because he did look as though he was in shock really. That's probably unfair, but he had a lot that he had to say that was changing, and I'm not sure the hows came across.
No, I think, and I too, I share that. I mean, I want this desperately to work. I want it to be better. But having been through down this road more than once, this is territory that I don't think, unless you've been through that, you don't know what you're going to face. And what you're going to face is a significant professional challenge. Probably the greatest professional challenge I've ever had. And I think that Martin Oliver, it's only been 9 months in the job, been managing post Caversham, trying to work his way through all this. To now sort of, this feels to me like a tsunami that's coming, and I really do hope that he surrounds himself with people who are up for that, who are skilled enough to deliver on it, who know what they're doing, and that actually he gets to a point where he feels surrounded by people who can give him the expertise that he needs. The cultural thing as well. We've got senior managers in Ofsted currently being repositioned into new jobs who've overseen the culture. That, if I was at HMI thinking, oh, well, I'm surprised there hasn't been more shift in the senior leadership. That might come, let's face it might come. Christine Gilbert did point to that as a requirement. But I do feel as though this is a massive challenge, and it might not look it at the moment, but let me tell you, Martin, it's a hell of a ride,
So one interesting thing with the announcement that I'm seeking clarification on is who will own the report card? Is it Ofsted's? Is it the departments? Is inspection a contribution to something bigger that is the report card? Therefore, inspection's a component of it. None of that at this stage is clear at all.
No, it would be helpful if the DfE did take that off Ofsted, so Ofsted became part of that, contributed to that rather than creating it. I think that in itself, would be a helpful step to clarify that. But I think we said before, I've seen some mock-ups of the scorecards that are going around, and they look pretty primitive. Don't want to give the impression that these are, from what I've seen, well developed. There might be well developed thinking, but the mock-ups don't look that impressive, to be honest, at the moment.
No, and I think
family trusts are involved. wonder if Fisher Family Trust would be involved, because they've developed a way of being able to share the data with governors, with parents, in a way that's understandable and quite well presented, in my view.
We don't. I'm not entirely sure who's developing that. I know that I'm involved in a rethinking assessment group that is badgering the DfE, for a say in all of this. So this is where I've seen some of the mock-ups. So, but I think that we've got this special expert group. I think there probably is a need for, bearing in mind the timescale, for drawing in a specialist group in the DfE, drawing in from might be the Fisher Family Trust or whatever, to try and come up with something. That might be going on. I've not heard about it, but it may be going on already. I mean, let's face it, only 2 months into a new government, aren't we? I mean,
Yes.
gosh, I mean, I had sympathy on all sides with this, but we do, if we're going to deliver a scorecard for next year, what we've got at the moment, I don't think is up for. I don't think it's part of what we've got now. Doesn't look as though it's going to do the job. What I've seen, but there may be some superstar producing it somewhere. I hope there is.
Yeah, I think there's a key question about what's its purpose. If you go back to when Ofsted started, there was very little information available publicly about schools, about their context, about how they were performing. Where we are now, we're in a completely different situation.
Yeah.
You've got, as Stan's mentioned, Fisher Family Trust. There's a whole host of information that's published, and schools are required to publish other information on their website. So there's a lot out there that wasn't out there when inspection started. So it begs the question, if you can put all that out there anyway, on a regular basis, what do you then want inspection to do? Because there's no point in inspection doing the same thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Actually, John, when Frank and I started inspecting, the only data that was comparable data with a national thing was attendance. That was the only piece of data that we had that you could say, yes, you are below or above a national expectation.
It's funny because in those days, Stan, I remember HMI saying to me, well, you can have great attendance, but it doesn't mean to say the kids are learning anything. I take that point, but actually at the moment, there are many schools that would be desperate just to get the kids in.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And in a way, the shifting priorities here, the scorecard needs to be able to reflect that, I think. I think government has a role, I think, in trying to, if there's a national priority, for example, it might be around skill development. If we could use the scorecard to actually just try and tweak and shift thinking in terms of the focus, then that could be quite useful. Not steer it right over here, but actually just some gentle tweaking within the scorecard from year to year could be quite helpful to improve the economy, to improve job prospects, life chances, that sort of thing.
I think the worry in this is that the timetable becomes the driver.
Yes.
Because they've said we'll change this year and next year it will be completely different. The emphasis will be on meeting the deadline, and the risk then is that you end up with a compromised system because you haven't got time to ask the fundamental questions and to actually get what you really need.
Yeah.
So you end up with something that's short of the ideal.
It's a consultation as well, isn't it? Because there will be people out there who have got ideas. I mean, I think the role of for me, let's hear the ideas. Let's see those ideas. Let's flush those out. I think that's, at least people feel as though they've contributed or had the chance to contribute. I think the risk we face now is with a deadline that's tight. Keep it tight in terms of who we involve. We've got one here that looks half finished. Let's start with that one. And I think we lose then this sense of the profession coming together to get something that works reasonably well. And I think consultations have always been, well, this is what's going to happen. What do you think of it? That's how Ofsted does it.
Yeah.
I think we can't fall down that trap again. I think this is why I think the framework, the scorecards, we need much more time to embrace the views and consider those. Anyway, perhaps I'm just old hat now. Perhaps I am.
Interesting times ahead then.
It is. Hey John, would you come back? Have you enjoyed this enough? You can't. If it's no, then we'll cut this off the video. All right. But actually, I'd be fascinated to have another conversation with you in the summer to
Yes, I'd be
see
very
where we
happy to.
are, in terms of framework development, scorecards. I think it'd be interesting to see where we think we are then.
Yeah, I mean, I still have an interest. I mean, I'm still, as much I keep a personal interest in all of this, having been involved in it in my career. But I'm chair of governors at a local primary school that's now part of an academy, and I'm also a member of a free school trust in another part of our county. So, I have that interest as well as my personal interest. Yes, I'd be very interested to come back and see where we've got to somewhere down the line.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Well, I have to say, I know, John, that a number of people that you've worked with will be watching this video. And what's come over here is just, you haven't changed. You haven't changed. Always been sort of, it's that conciliatory approach, trying to find the solution, but trying to find it in such a way that you feel that your voice has been heard. You might not follow it, but I always felt that with you. And you were also very open about the struggles of actually progressing this through a ministerial team. I think also that was, that insight was very helpful and steered me away from going down that avenue, because probably it wasn't going to get very far. I think that was also very helpful. But yeah, love to have you back. Wow, I'm just reminiscing now.
the good old days.
It wasn't all. I mean, I have to say, life working in Ofsted was a significant professional challenge many times. But at that stage, there were some, as Stan and I saw, there were some amazing people around, and there still are. In the inspectorate, and it's really just trying to find a mechanism to enable Martin Oliver to tap that resource and to draw out what there is there. And I wish him all the best. And I want to thank you, John, for joining us, and thank you, Stan. We're back. Do you know who we got next week?
No.
Mel.
I've told you many times, Frank. My life has yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Professor Mel Ainscough is here next week.
Oh, right.
His new book, Developing Inclusive Schools. It's as if it was all planned for the new Labour government. We'll be talking to him about that new book, Pathways to Success. So until next week, and thank you, John. Until the summer, we'll see you then. Okay, take care.
All the best, both.
Bye-bye. Bye.